Thank you very much for having me here today at the Benike Library. I'm excited to share my work and my thoughts with you. And so that I don't get too much out of track, I want to set a timer. One second for that. Yes, and I'll get right into it. So in my culture, in Yoruba culture, there is a saying about betrayal. And the saying is, "Enita ko kini lẹ́yìn tó fẹ̀gùn sọ́wọ́, enita ko fẹ́ni lójú tó fàtà sẹ́nu." And in English, that would translate to, almost translate to the ones we have trusted to scratch our itchy backs have put thorns in their hands, and the ones we have trusted to blow the dust out of our eyes have put pepper in their mouth. I believe that most protests are born out of a feeling of betrayal. Second. I believe that most protests are born out of a feeling of betrayal, especially betrayal that is, especially a betrayal by those who were put in a position of trust and failed to care for those who have trusted them to do so. The images I'm about to show you, I shot them in 2018, I believe, 2018, May 2018. This protest was organized by members of the Catholic Church in response to some killings that have been happening in many parts of Nigeria when cattle herders and farmers would clash over land disputes. And at this particular time in 2018, 2 Catholic priests were murdered, and several members of the church were killed during the church ceremony. And the church found the best way the church protested. I think this was the best way for them to respond. But up to today, we still have the same problems happening across many parts of Nigeria. There are many historical protests that have happened here in Nigeria, and I would like to highlight the Abeokuta Women's Revolts. This was a resistance that was led by the women of Abeokuta in the late 1940s against unfair taxation by the then Nigerian colonial government. Under the colonial system, the traditional economic roles of women declined while their taxes were increasing. In pre-colonial Nigeria, the markets, or in pre-colonial Western Nigeria and Yoruba land, the markets and trade economics were run mostly by women who controlled these markets and most trading areas. And women had at least 2 guaranteed political seats in the King's Court of any Yoruba town or city as part of the ruling council. These are the offices of the Iyaloja. This is the mother of the market, and the Iyalode, who is like a master of ceremony. The colonial government was more patriarchal in its structure, and it weakened most of the economic powers of the women, while they were still required to pay high taxes separate from those that their husbands or their families paid. And the women protested against this, and as a result of their protest, 4 women received seats in the local council of the time, and the high taxation was ended. So stories like this inspire us and remind us that to some extent protesting works. This the Abeokuta Women's Union, which at the time was headed by Funmilayo Ransom Kuti, a great Nigerian activist and educator, and of course the mother and teacher to the great fella Nikolako Kuti, who also went on to become a great Nigerian activist and musician. On the 18th of February 1977, Funmilayo Ransom Kuti was thrown from the second floor window during an attack on Fela's house, then known as Kalakuta Republic, here in Lagos by the then Nigerian military government that was headed by Olusegun Obasanjo. She was hospitalized and eventually died in April 1978 as a result of her injuries. And today makes it exactly 44 years since this unlawful attack and justice that hasn't been served. The military head of state at the time later went on to become a 2-term civilian president in Nigeria. And one would wonder why justice seems to be elusive while the laws that we set up are clear. And I believe it would be because most of the law breaking or because those who we have trusted to enforce the laws that we have all communally agreed to have been the most successful at breaking these laws and abusing these laws. And the similar patterns of violence have reoccurred time and time again. The Nigerian government, military or civilian, has proven that its only response to activism and protests is violence. And this, again, is a betrayal. That these people who come to us to beg for these positions of trust and servitude immediately unveil their fangs when accountability is demanded for. Abeokuta is a town just about 90 minutes outside of Lagos. One second. Yes, Abeokuta is a town 90 minutes outside of Lagos. And I think I mentioned that today marks 44 years that Funmilayo Ransom Kuti was attacked and brutally thrown out of the window by a government that she would have trusted to protect her life and secure her human rights. From the very beginning of my storytelling journey, I have found myself using my art to speak about these things as they affect me and my immediate environment. In my university days, I documented the harsh living conditions of many students, including myself, a condition that worsened year after year due to the neglect of those who were entrusted to provide facilities for these students. It was my first documentary project, and it went on to win a National Geographic Prize that pretty much grounded me into the wider documentary community. These are images from my project, Bonafide Squatters, that show some of the subpar living conditions of students, undergraduates mostly, who who come to this institution of higher learning to mostly suffer and struggle to graduate. While I was in the university, I studied visual arts, and while I was developing my artistry at the same time as my documentary making, very separately at first, because I naively assumed that documentaries were made up of unbiased facts and art was made up of personal opinions. But I soon learned better. In choosing what to record and what to show, documentations are already personal opinions to a very large extent, because every decision you make has a potential to color your story differently. As the author of a story, you decide to, say, move in closer to highlight some people or some action, and that itself comes with consequences. And when you decide to step out to show even a bigger picture, it comes with its own set of consequences. How you include people in your story, who you choose to include in your story, and how you choose to present these people in your stories goes on to have consequences of its own. Last year, I was commissioned to create work by the curators of the BredaPhoto Festival. And before I show some of that work, I would like to state that upon realizing that documentation was not free of personal bias or opinions, I started to experiment with creative mediums to tell nonfiction stories in a way that helped me include information that I couldn't photograph firsthand or record due to maybe access or just the general nature of the story that I was trying to tell. And it also allowed me express more of my own opinions directly onto the work that I was making. This project, titled Blue Letter, is a conceptual documentation of the rigors of travel and visa processing, migration for people who come from countries that are generally considered not to have high quality visas, high quality passports, if I may put it that way. And the sort of the frustration and the mental stress that comes from the many rejections and the extra layers of bureaucracy and requirements that is heavily demanded from people who come from these countries, such as Nigeria. There are scholars who cannot travel to universities where they have gotten admitted because the diplomatic relationship between countries or the visa requirements from their country is unattainable. And many times this is the case for majority of people traveling from so-called third world countries to, well, the so-called developed countries. This project, titled Terms of Privacy, I created for the BredaPhoto Festival last year. And this project illustrates how much trust we have put in the big data companies over the years, and the trust we have, the trust we ignorantly had in them to protect our information and their betrayal in not doing so. The privacy policies and agreements offered by big data companies are largely incomprehensible and difficult to the average Facebook or Gmail user. And the language and the structure of these agreements plays a major role in the broad ignorance around the subject of what happens to our personal information once it is uploaded. And we all know that very few or none of us would be willing or be able to afford to hire a lawyer just to open a social media page, or every time you need to open a new email. However, big data companies, their policies and agreements, which include rules on privacy and anonymity that we must sign, are written and coded and embedded in legal jargon that was designed by lawyers for other lawyers. And this series, Terms of Privacy, is a conceptual representation of the maze presented to us in these terms of use and how overwhelming it is sometimes when we try to swim through them. I should mention that not all of the stories that I decide to tell require this extra layer of conceptualization. Sometimes what I find in my viewfinder is enough and is presented as such. I'm of this opinion that the art world is maybe sometimes too obsessed with style and an artist's consistency with a particular style in a way that could be unhealthy or limiting for some kind of artist. So for me, I decide style and technique depending on the story that I'm going to tell. For an artist who is essentially trying to communicate information to a diverse audience, I prefer to choose a way that would best, tell each individual story to those who it is intended to inform. And it also acts as a middle ground for me to share and express and for the audience to digest this information. This leads me to exploring styles that don't necessarily look similar across board. My most recent work has been documenting the NSAS protests here in Lagos. And even if I wouldn't tag myself as a protest photographer, I've seen and documented quite a number of them. And the NSAS protest has been quite unique and interesting to me. For the first reason being that it has no opposition political party or organization with an agenda, with a wider agenda funding or backing it. This is a protest that I would maybe consider as the people's protest. For lack of a better word, I would say that the protest started organically, yes, by young Nigerians who were frustrated by their own policing targeting them. This protest was against a system that does not only support but ensure police brutality against Nigerians, especially young Nigerians, by the Nigerian police. And this is a betrayal that runs really deep because it is really difficult. When the police attacks you, who do you call? You cannot call the police who you have entrusted to protect you in the first place. The just before the NSAS protest, there was another protest about a week or two before. That was the Revolution Now protest, and this one second, let me find this image. So, all right, the Revolution Now protest was organized by, well, the Revolution Now group, a group of young Nigerians politically affiliated with one of the youngest presidential aspirants the country has had. And this protest happened on the Nigerian independence anniversary to show a discontent for the way things were going in the country. And well, this young man had a message for the police: drop your gun and join the revolution. But that was not exactly the case, because a few minutes after taking that particular photograph, a group of policemen, heavily armed, showed up and rounded up the protesters, while some tried to escape, took their placards away and arrested them unlawfully. The journalists on the scene, about 3 of us, were also harassed and threatened. Our cameras were, we had to struggle to get our equipment back. And it was such a very chaotic environment that was otherwise peaceful before the police showed up. But an interesting turn of events was immediately after those about 20 protesters who arrived earlier were rounded up, about 500 to 700 more protesters showed up, and the protest happened anyways. And it was, well, if the aim was to occupy or to disrupt activities, it was a successful protest on the part of these protesters. The Nigerian government and its security forces responded to the NSAS protests against police brutality by shooting live ammunition at peaceful protesters at the Lekki toll gate, a betrayal by the very system that is entrusted with ensuring their safety and fundamental human rights. And the origin of this problem can be traced back to the colonial foundation of the Nigerian police. The police has its origin as an institution that was created mainly to oppress its citizens into submission and colonial control. And this even featured in Chinua Achebe's most popular work, Things Fall Apart. For those who don't know Chinua Achebe, Chinua Achebe is a great Nigerian writer who wrote extensively about colonial Nigeria and the change it brought to its people and the culture. The oppressive use of the police against its citizens has continued to be employed today by the ruling class who inherited the government from them. I will take a minute to share some images from the NSAS protest. This protest showed me, the protest that I witnessed showed me a very different kind of renaissance among the youths in Nigeria who wanted their country back by all means and fought for it. There were several key documentations that I was able to recall, like these protesters cleaning up the protest venues to show, this shows me personally that these people care about the country that they were fighting for. And images like this helped us fight the many attempts by the government to blackmail or to color the protesters as violent and were violent thugs who were trying to just destroy the city. One important feature that I like to talk about my documentary work is deciding what to leave out of a story, or how much of a story to share, or when to share how much of a story. A decision that we mostly always forget to consider, but it is true. I believe that what we as artists or photographers decide to leave out of a story can be just equally as important as what we decide to record, to document, and to share. Last Saturday, the 13th of February, a protest was held at the same Lekki toll gate against a decision by the government and the judicial panel to reopen the toll gate and back to commercial activities. The toll gate where protesters were shot last October, and even as the people continue to await justice, that continues to seem more unlikely as the government makes its position more clear. The government responded again with force, banning the protest, and there was a heavy police presence and a show of force that I believe was meant to be propaganda, to discourage or to share or to scare people who may have had intentions to show up to this protest. And I decided not to share these images at the time of the protests, as I did not want to help contribute to this propaganda, and I did not want to be a tool for oppression. The images I think I can share today. Second, sorry. Yes. So a day before this show of force, a day or two, there was a very violent riot right in front of the police headquarters here in Lagos. And this kind of very heavy response was not the case on that day. And I think this clearly tells us where the government's priorities are, that the lives of citizens are not as precious to them. This obscuring of identities or some information is something that I've started right from the beginning of my storytelling journey. From my first documentary project, Bonafide Squatters, I decided to only share images that concealed the individual identity of the students who decided to trust me enough to share their stories with me. I didn't trust the university authorities not to harass or penalize the students for being a part of that project, because the University of Lagos at that time, and even now, I think, is the University of Lagos, and I think many other universities across Nigeria who have taken a similar pattern have become notorious for banning student protest and even rusticating students who come out to protest, and they go as far as making students sign away their rights to protesting through indemnity forms and things like that. I remember having to sign one of those such forms in my third year as a student. And when you sign away your life or your right to fight, it basically puts you at a disadvantage. That even when situations get critical and crazy, it is hard for you to fight. I would quickly go back and share some of the images from the Bonafide Squatters project. Maybe I'll do that in a bit. But just rounding up, I would say that as opinionated or as biased as documentation can be, I believe that it has never been more important. Documentation has existed in art since prehistoric times. Some of the first samples of art from the cave paintings in Lascaux and Namibia that we have are documentaries. And I believe that this obsession to record things as we see them is essential to our survival. because human memory, I believe, can be very fleeting. We are likely to forget things, especially things that are unpleasant to remember. The images that came from the protests last year and the shootings on the 20th of October have continued to remind us of the things that happened and how they happened. And there have been several attempts by the government to gaslight people, from first denying that the military was at the scene to later admitting that they were there but didn't shoot. The story has changed a couple of times. They later admitted to shooting only blank bullets and recently admitted to maybe shooting some live ammunition too. And their story has changed several times, but the documentation has not. And that is what we have left. It has protected us mentally from gaslighting and doubting in our own minds the things that we witnessed and believed to be true. The role of art in protest goes beyond documentation. Many times the art itself is the protest. Protest art has helped activists and movements communicate messages that motivate them and the rest of societies, from icons and posters to installations, even costumes. Art has always had a very prominent role in revolutions across many societies and across different eras. Either a revolution is successful or not, many times what is left of it is the art that was created for it and about it. Thank you very much.